Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Anne-Marie Santamarina from LincolnIT, and it's my pleasure to have you here with the second installation of what we are calling our Take Flight with LincolnIT series, focused around a bevy of subjects and subject matter around security and the value of security and backing up in the cloud. So we know that many people have adopted some sort of cloud environment, especially with the recent events that we experienced in 2020. And so we thought that the topic would be timely for our customers and our prospects and people that we're working with in the community to bring some of our subject matter experts to the to the conversation to talk about this topic. So today it's my pleasure to have two of our strategic and diamond partners with us. So we are a diamond partner with Cybersafe Cybersafe Solutions, and we are a blue diamond partner with Datto. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Rosana Filingeri, who's going to be our moderator today, and she's going to lead our panel in a discussion around defense in depth. So Rosana, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I'd like to have you introduce the panel and take over.
Awesome. Thank you so much. My name is Rosana. I am Cybersafe's Vice President of Business Development. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for just a couple of years now, and to me, I think it is one of the most exciting, fast-growing, fast-paced at times industry. So conversations like this always get me super excited. So the opportunity to moderate today was, incredible for me. So thank you again. Before we get started, I just want to give each of our panelists a quick moment to introduce themselves. I figured it would be cool if you guys could just incorporate, just a little fact about why you love your job, right? I did just mention that obviously in security it can be really exciting, sometimes even hectic at times. So I'd love for you guys just to throw something in there so we could get to know you at first. So we will start off with Ron, if you could please introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Rosana. My name is Ron Cuevas. I'm the Vice President of Sales here at LincolnIT. Also have other responsibilities, including vCIO. I work closely with Amber on the business development and marketing side as well. It's exciting to work with partners like Cybersafe and Datto, and that's what gets me excited for my job, because the professionalism exhibited by these organizations and the depth and breadth of the talent that they bring to the table makes my job a lot easier when I go to talk to customers. So really stoked to be with these guys and look forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ron. So next up, we have Chris.
Hey, I'm Chris Henderson. I'm the Director of Information Security for Datto. I've been with the company 8 years, previously led our software quality assurance and then business intelligence functions, and finally made the switch over to cybersecurity about 4 years ago. I've been into cybersecurity since I was a child, hacking video games, and love that I can do that professionally now. Right, working for Datto, it's nice. We're keeping small and medium businesses safe, and so I'm really working to help keep sort of mom and pop shops open and running in the face of ransomware rather than making some rich guy richer. And so I love working here.
Awesome. And last but not least, Dom, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself. Dom, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that.
There we go.
I'm Dominic Gandalf. Yeah, just trying to cut out the background noise. You know how that works. Dominic Gandalf. I'm the Chief Security Strategist with Cybersafe Solutions. I've been working with Cybersafe for over close to 7 years now. I have a tremendous passion for this industry. Been in the industry for probably 20 plus years. Like Chris mentioned, started out on a Commodore 64. Now I'm actually showing my age. Setting up bulletin board systems and doing stuff back then, which probably wasn't illegal, but looking back now, probably was to the current day stuff, but nothing crazy. But passionate about this industry because it's constantly changing, it's evolving, and every day we come in, it's always something new. But I really enjoy working primarily on the front end of the business, working very closely with our clients to help them design, implement, and put in a cyber defense program to protect them from the latest, greatest threats. But really, bringing my skills and my expertise following best practice and guidelines, and bringing that level of comfort to organizations to know that they're working with a trusted advisor and extension to their department, and knowing that I'm an email or a phone call away, and just being a strong partner to those businesses.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for, coming to join as panelists today. I think that each of your backgrounds brings something really exciting and interesting, and also some different perspectives as well. So just before we get started, I do want to reiterate, I believe Anne-Marie might have dropped it in the chat. If you guys have any questions as we start to have a conversation, maybe one of my questions may prompt a question for you, please feel free to drop those in the chat. We can address them maybe as they come up. Otherwise, we can save them to the end if they are, not fully on topic. But any and all questions are, of course, welcomed. We would love to answer them, especially with the individuals of expertise that we have on the line. So just as we get started, I do just want to intro the term defense in depth. So you may have heard or even seen in the invite, we've been talking about a defense in depth security approach. So, really let's start out with what that is, and then that will be followed with a question, and we will give it to each of our panelists so they can have a chance to answer. So when we think about a defense in depth approach, especially when we think about a defense in depth cybersecurity approach, it talks about having multiple layers, right? Multiple aspects of defense within an organization to not only help them reduce their risk, mitigate that risk, right? So sometimes we look at preventative measures, other times we look at detection measures. When we bubble all of those things into one concept, that's where we start to talk about defense in depth. So I will start off with just each of you. I'll pose the question first, of course, to Ron. And that first question is, Ron, in your eyes, what do you think the most effective cybersecurity measure an organization can implement? And how do you see that incorporate into that defense in depth approach?
I think the most important to me is education, and educating your end users and your business leaders what that definition really is. As a managed services organization, we provide layered security approaches to all the solutions that we deploy. But, the things that we do not do is what, again, companies like Datto and Cybersafe Solutions, that real-time threat protection to go ahead and mitigate those real-time threats going on. So a business leader could think, I have an antivirus, in my environment. That is clearly not sufficient in this day and age, right, for protecting a complete infrastructure and data services within your infrastructure, especially since people are still working in this hybrid remote model, right, which I know we'll get into a little bit more. But to me, I think it's really education as to what is really installed in the infrastructure, what your service provider, maybe your IT department is responsible for, and then what products and services organizations like a Cybersafe or Datto bring to the table.
Great point. So really about having that one security measure, knowing what it is, and then also knowing where its potential gaps may come up. Excellent point, Ron. Chris, I'd like to give this to you next.
Yeah, it's somewhat echoing what Ron says. So security awareness training for your staff. I think a lot of people try to solve security through technology, and technology is phenomenal, but it ultimately will have gaps, right? I always tell our staff, I run our monthly cybersecurity training in-house, and I always tell everybody it's the most valuable use of my time month over month. Your humans can detect anomalous activity far better than even the most expensive computer software. And for those instances where, right, your technology is going to catch 99% of threats that come into your environment, but your users truly understand what weird feels like. And right, that one email that gets through your email filters, right, helping them understand this is phishing. If you engage in it, what does it look like when you engaged? Right, attackers are trying to hide their tracks so you don't even know that you've fallen victim to phishing. Really educating users and helping bolster their confidence in reporting to our security teams as the ultimate fail-safe to any technology solution that you ultimately deploy.
Great response. And I did hear something from you that I want to just reiterate to make sure that everyone captured. So you gave an excellent example, right? You talked about an email filter, unfortunately letting an email through. The next measure right behind that was that user. So of course we relied on that email filter, and we always should, not to say that was a bad product, but right behind that was a user that was trained. So that user had the ability to say, well, hold on a second, just because I see this doesn't mean it should be happening. Let me think about it, right? So that's really where that training came in, to be that next layer in defense. So excellent example, and I hope everyone captured that. Dom, if you want to go ahead and share as well.
Sure, absolutely. So following along with Ron and Chris, it's 100% true that education and awareness that we have to bring to organizations for them to truly understand what's involved when it comes to security. And I think vendors that are out there have constantly pushed their product, and to me has made the matter worse in the sense of, there is no silver bullet out there. It's a combination of looking at people, process, technology, not technology by itself. But I think the more important thing is really changing the mindset from a prevention only approach to a continuous monitoring, detection, and response approach. Visibility is the biggest issue and problem that's out there today, that organizations don't know they've been breached. They don't know when their security controls are failing. So it's important to understand that there is no such thing as 100% security. When you do add users to a system and add functionality, that 100% security drops. So it's important to follow that defense in depth and make it difficult, make these threat actors to try and jump through hoops, make it difficult for them to get to their ultimate goal, which is obviously trying to steal data exfiltration, or most importantly is dealing with a ransomware attack and taking down your entire organization. So.
And then they
Thank you, Dom.
And then,
Yeah.
yes.
Exactly. It's a 1-2 punch, right, Chris?
Yeah, they've got
a 1-2 punch.
attack in depth now.
Yeah, that's true. That is actually true. So I think that each of you shared, areas of visibility, right? Ron, I kind of heard you saying, have some visibility into what's within your infrastructure, know what it looks like, know what you have. Chris talked about having visibility into understanding what the users are doing, right? Are they trained? If they are trained, how are they doing? Are we testing them to see if they're actually, doing well in identifying simulated phish, things like that? Now, Dom, I just want to ask you a quick follow-up question. When you mean visibility, can you give us a little bit of context into what that means?
Sure. Visibility and understanding the attack surface, right? That's what these threat actors are going after. They're going after the human, right? Vulnerability. We all have an operating system, our brain, to process information. They're going after the applications, the software, the hardware that we use on an everyday basis. They're looking at the assets that you're using. So it's important that you have visibility in understanding, what systems people are using, where they're logging in from, and so on and so forth. So without that visibility to know, if an end user brings in a home laptop, plugs it into the network, they can take down the organization. Or where are they logging in from? Are they just using a password, or are they using some, a combination of a password with two-factor authentication? So it's really the most important thing is having that visibility. And, it's an impossibility to prevent all attacks. We can prevent most. But having that visibility and being able to detect in a timely fashion, it all comes down to controlling the damage. And that's really, what the name of the game is.
Excellent. So we will actually get back to that prevention and detection conversation in just a moment. But before then, I want to ask you guys a question, and maybe some of the people listening today may know what this feels like, or maybe in this position themselves, or maybe in the past they have. And really that is what we found is sometimes companies, sometimes IT teams, security teams are tasked or under pressure to do more with less. How do you guys recommend that they can best leverage current security tools that may already be within their solution stack?
I'll start. So I think it's understanding what they have available. and it really doesn't cover the spectrum of and the technology gap. The technology stack that really needs to be addressed. And so, again, I talked about layered security approach before. It's really working your way backwards or frontwards, whichever way you want to look at it, from the end user all the way back into the network infrastructure, and then through obviously to the internet services that are provided and beyond. So, making sure that you understand the risk of not having a particular solution in place. And I'll give an example, right? And it's an easy one. Web content filtering, right? There are many products out there that sell web content filtering that help the user understand when they're actually getting to a website that should not be accessed, right? And it's a global databases, and there are products out there that do it very well. Do you have something like that? Are you interested? Are you just a domestic player, a domestic consumer in your business? And do you really need to get to Romania or any other country to get to a website? Most probably not. If you're an international player, a little bit different, right? You look at those solutions a little bit differently, but you need to understand what your business is, and then obviously the solutions that are put in place, and then work with people that actually know those subjects and know those products. Don't just rely on one opinion, seek out other opinions.
Right. So Ron, if I'm hearing you, I think, what you've kind of said was maximize your investments, make sure that the current tool or product that you have in place is right for your organization, is fitting for your organization, but also that you're using it correctly. I think that's the point that you were making. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Excellent. Okay. So Dom, I'd like to have you answer this next, please.
Sure. I would say that it's vital to check the effectiveness of those security controls, those security investments that you've made, and to be blunt, attack yourself, before a threat actor does. There are services that are out there, something known as breach and attack simulation, where you're simulating what a real attacker would, attack that email filtering, that web filtering. Testing your endpoints, testing your network resiliency. I think we've gotten into the habit of we purchase all these security controls and tools, we set them up, and then really at the end of the day, how do you know how well they're working? Do you really want to wait till a threat actor bypasses that defense in depth, or would you rather run some sort of attacks or simulation? And it's not a pen test. It's breach and attack simulation. It's a new type of platform or service out there in the industry, and that's why it's important to work with a security advisor, because they're always staying up to date on what the latest and greatest way of really testing your defenses and understand what your security posture is all about. You always got to stay ahead of the curve. These threat actors are evolving, and you have to evolve with them. Otherwise, you're going to lose every single time.
Right. Great theme. Continuously assess. Even if you put something in place, continuously assess it. I think we saw this quite a bit after, the world experienced COVID. It brought a lot of organizations home, and some questions had to be asked. Are we sufficiently working? Are we protected? Each of those questions. So Chris, I do want to give you the same question, and I will just reiterate. I see some people might have actually just joined us. So how can an organization that's under pressure to do more with less of a budget, less resources, how can they best leverage their current solutions and products that are in their stack?
Yeah, I think it depends where you're gapped and where you have less, right? So there's people, process, technology. I think if you are hurting for funding, right, bringing in additional technology is not going to work because it all costs money. And so in those instances, we generally will augment with open source technologies, right? The cybersecurity community is very giving in open source technologies, and many of those will integrate with your existing paid vendor relationships. And you can get a lot more out of those tools, integrating them with open source technologies in order to augment their capabilities where you are gapped, where those breach simulations maybe are finding problems in your current defensive posture. Now, if you're understaffed on people, hopefully you have funding, and then you purchase more technology, assuming that you have the people to support that technology, right? And but all of that really, if you don't have documented processes that you've gone through and tested for your response using those technologies, it's really balancing, do we have the people to service the technologies and the documented processes to make those effective within our organization. And most people are gapped in one of those three areas of that triangle, and it's really bolstering that area and bringing that deficiency up the best that you can.
Awesome. So would you say that really starts with the conversation, just understanding what you have in place, understanding where your resources can go, and then, putting a strategy together?
Yeah, I mean, I love Dom's suggestion of breach simulation. At Datto, we take a posture where we do pen tests externally. So what do we look like from an outside attacker? But then the rest of our year is actually spent doing this exercise called assume breach. So we assume that our first line of defense is going to fail. And our pen testers are given carte blanche access to go and attack anything internally once they have a foothold, rip through our environment best that you can and document along the way. And that's how we prioritize additional spend, either with people, process, or technology, right? It all costs something, whether it's time, money, or effort, and right, prioritizing those based upon your actualized risks are very important.
And
That's
Rosana,
really cool.
if anyone can see this, this is a device that's used in the assume breach. Very, very dangerous, and you could do a lot with this small little box that's about the size of a cigarette box.
Right. So I think what you're all saying is, it's not a matter of if something will happen, it's a matter of when. So we all should be operating, on the philosophy, on the mindset that, okay, let's assume something can happen. Now, where do we go? Can we detect it? Do we have the proper measures in place? Are our investments working for us? Maybe the things that we've purchased, or do we know what we're doing, right? Do we know how we're using this, or should we consult with an outside party who maybe has further expertise? So similar theme in all of your answers, and thank you for sharing that about the pen test, because I think that's really important, right? It shows us just a different perspective of things. So my next question will be, I think, one of the hottest topics of today's time, and that is about cloud adoption. So we've seen cloud adoption as a whole really at an all-time high right now. So my question is, how do you guys recommend that companies can make sure they're not sacrificing security when they are migrating or moving to the cloud? Chris, do you want to take this one first?
Sure. I find a lot of people have this belief that the cloud is secure just natively. In reality, the only thing the cloud buys you is the lack of management of hardware. There is not some built-in security function to the cloud. And it doesn't actually require less work, because the trade-offs for not having to manage the physical hardware is you now need to manage the security of your cloud platform, right? It's in your local building, right? It's very hard for an employee to lose a key, like a physical key, that then causes you a data breach. In the cloud, it's trivial for one of your employees to reuse a password on some video game website that gets breached that also gains access to your AWS root account. And so there is much more effort, and it's much easier to cause yourself security concerns through the toggles in AWS, for example, right? Inadvertently exposing your S3 buckets is like one of the most common mistakes everybody uses. And you're not immune to ransomware in that instance, right? Like that can still be exfiltrated and ransomed, just the same as your local environment. And so I think if an increased security spend is not part of your strategy of a cloud migration, you're setting yourself up for an inevitable disaster down the road.
Great point. So we started with the misconception, right? Moving to the cloud does not always make you more secure. Perhaps it may provide convenience at times, but a larger conversation should most definitely be had on what security measures should be implemented when doing so. Excellent point, Chris. Dom, do you want to go next?
Sure. Great points. Just moving out to the cloud. Again, there's a lot of security that's out there and capabilities that's out there, but you have to know what's best practice. You got to follow the guidelines. There's something known as zero trust shared responsibility, where it's a shared responsibility between you, the client, and the cloud provider. So they give you all the tools and bells and whistles, but you need to know what should get turned on and what's going to protect you the most. We see constantly, we have incident response engagements or cases that come in, more and more and more are related to cloud environments. especially Office 365, now known as Microsoft 365. Getting into mailboxes, phishing being done from these user mailboxes to their clients, being able to download data that's in these mailboxes, and something like that could be avoided if you turn on something like two-factor authentication. So there's a lot that can be done to protect your organization when you move to the cloud, but you can't just blindly just throw your data out there and say, well, no one's going to attack Microsoft, or no one's going to attack Google or Amazon because they're so big. Well, they are, but the responsibility, again, is that shared responsibility between the organization and the cloud provider.
So Dom, from what you just said, would you say that an organization's data is theirs and their responsibility no matter where it sits?
Yes, you're responsible for wherever your data resides, whether it's on-prem or it's in the cloud. It's not the cloud provider's responsibility. You are responsible for that data no matter where it resides.
Thank you. Ron?
Echoing what Dom and Chris has said, to me, it's all about when you make the decision or get informed of moving to the cloud, is taking advantage of that process to make you more secure, right? You should be, that's the first conversation that you should have with any solutions provider to say, I want to move to the cloud. And we hear this all the time. And we talk about, how are you protecting your data? How are you backing up your data? How are you accessing your data? Again, we talked about remote workforce, in the office, et cetera. It's got to be the first topic of conversation. And Dom hit it right on the head. Most times when a client, somebody comes to us and says, I want to move to the cloud, we're talking about multi-factor authentication. We're talking about locking down your security protocols and making sure that simple things are taken care of. For example, no service provider can stop a phishing attack that says, please transfer, this amount of money to this account if it's just done by the end user. There's really no protection around that. That's the process piece of the people process technology, right? And so those discussions need to be had because the expectations need to be set as to what is going to be available to you from a security perspective in the cloud. And also, what is the responsibility of the cloud provider? Not all are built the same. You have hybrid cloud environments, public cloud environments, private cloud environments. Get educated, understand what each one of those really are responsible for before you make a decision. Make sure it's an informed decision.
Awesome. So I think we've talked about a couple different things so far, and from what I've heard from you guys is there's no such thing as a silver bullet, right? Each of you gave examples as to proving that to be true, but I do just want to take a moment just to continue out that conversation. So we talked about things that we can do to mitigate our risk, right? We cannot eliminate it. We know that's just not a possibility. I heard from you guys strong passwords. I heard from you guys having multi-factor turned on. I also heard having backups and checking on the integrity of those backups. But I just want to give you guys just a forum just so we can have an open conversation real quick. Let's talk about those preventative measures. Do you guys recommend for an organization to start with any in particular? Do you have any best practices associated with any of those?
I think for
Feel
me,
free just to jump in.
Yeah, I think for me, the best practice is getting educated, right, on what the options are. And every business is going to be built a little bit differently, right? It could be an SMB, it could be mid-market, and enterprises obviously are much different. So for the SMB market, which we'll target today in this conversation, it's understanding their business model, understanding what their needs are. It used to be that people would just put development roles into the cloud-based services, right? And so that's gone by the wayside. Look at e-commerce. Mid-market e-commerce sites are on Azure, AWS, and other platforms such as that. So, just because you're putting your credit card in doesn't think it's private and secure, right? It's on those public cloud services, and they have to build security around that. So same thing with your business data. If you're going to be doing this and seriously contemplating moving to the cloud, you need to get to a trusted advisor that's going to tell you the facts of what your business should and shouldn't be doing in that cloud environment. That's the best way for me to say, just get educated on what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Yeah.
there's also, right, going back to the doing more with less, there's a million tools out there that you could pay for that will monitor your cloud security or cloud security health posture. But most platforms nowadays, it's becoming standard to build that functionality into the platform in somewhat of a limited capability, but it is there, right? AWS has CloudWatch, Azure has, I think it's called the Trust Center or Security Center. And so taking advantage of the native tools of the platform that you ultimately choose, they have a list of best practices and they will audit you against those best practices and alert you when you're out of that compliance. Now, maybe you have a valid business reason for being out of that compliance, but you should be aware of that reason and document it. And otherwise, you should use those tools and close up your holes. Right? They really are there. AWS, Azure, they don't want you breached, and they're going to do everything in their power to help you make sure that you're not, and take advantage of those native tools.
Chris, I think to me, just to add on to that, it's all the options that have come along.
Oh, yeah.
Making sure that people that choose that option, the business understands why those options were chosen or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like
Yeah,
CloudTrail is expensive, but
Exactly.
it provides an awesome audit trail of what everything's going on in your environment.
Right. But the most important thing though is, you have all those capabilities that's out there, and if you turn them all on, it's great and everything, but you can't remove the human element from that. You need to have those experts that are continually monitoring and watching and making sure those controls are working. We all know that Microsoft is not perfect. There's a reason why there's Patch Tuesday. There are vulnerabilities every day. You have to be aware of it. You have to stay on top of it. You always have to be, 10 steps ahead of the bad actor. So it's important to have visibility out there to make sure those controls are working. Assess the cloud just like you would assess your on-prem environment.
Great. All of those were awesome responses. So the next question that I want to go through really quick is I want to address the difference between preventative and detection measures. We've talked a little bit about it today, and I think each of you have kind of alluded to some of the differences. But I just wanted to give you guys a moment to answer that. And the follow-up to that question, you guys can answer these together, is in your opinion, do you think that having both preventative and detection capabilities is necessary? Or can an organization just get away with one? Dom, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think there's a reason why the government puts out these special publications, right? The NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, they write these documents for best practices. One in particular is the NIST CSF, the Cybersecurity Framework, where they talk about protect, detect, respond, recover, and being able to fill in those buckets. Or you look at something like the CIS top 20 controls. And I don't know if most organizations know this, but if you're following the top 6 controls, which is a combination of that prevention, that detection, that response, if you're doing the top 5 or 6 controls, you're mitigating, I think, over 84 to 86% of a successful cyber attack for hitting your organization. If you do all 20 controls, you're looking at 97%. It's significant, but those 5 or 6 controls that incorporate, again, that prevention, detection, and response, that's putting you in that bucket of it costing a threat actor time, money, and resources to try and successfully penetrate and get into your organization. And that is what the name of the game is. Make it difficult, make it costly, and make them move on to the next easy target.
Chris, would you like to go next?
Sure. So preventative measures are great against defending yourselves from known attacks and known vulnerabilities. But we all know the term 0-day, right? Vulnerabilities that exist without available patches, vulnerabilities that have not been disclosed previously. And preventative tooling and technologies are phenomenal against protecting you from those. And you're going to make yourselves largely immune from a script kiddie going and breaching your company, right? Some 13-year-old is not going to deface your website. But detection measures really come into play from those APTs, advanced threats, nation state actors. You want to be aware, you want to detect when your prevention mechanisms have failed. A lot of your preventative measures will also operate in a detect mode, but you want to have separate control stacks for the two of those in order to prevent the low-level known attacks from hitting your environment, and then detect when somebody has gotten through those and have actually landed in your environment. Right, you should assume somebody will always get through those preventative measures, and you want to be able to alert very quickly as to somebody is in your environment and then tracking them throughout it.
Sure. Real-time response, real-time investigation obviously is critical in that scenario.
Right.
So Ron, I'd love to hear from you next.
Yes. Yes, I agree.
Yes. Okay.
No, I'm sorry, just being a wise guy. Listen, prevention is a big part of the game, right? And so you want to invest to help your organization prevent most of these bad actors from getting in, and that's protecting your business from your end users. That's how I see it, right? Your end users are not going to be as diligent as most people would hope and expect them to be. Some of it because of education, some of it just capability, and whatever the case may be, you still want to have those preventive measures in place that are cost effective for you to do, right? It makes sense for your business. You know, from a response and, detection measure, it all again goes to the business that you're in and making sure that you know what your risks are and being able to detect what needs to be detected and make sure you respond appropriately to when it's detected, right? Because sometimes you'll get an alert, it's not important. Well, if you set the alert and you did your due diligence and you did it right, it is important. Act on it, react on it, and understand what that was all about and then move on. So I do think both have its place in almost every business. I would say that there's very few people or businesses that would have room for error in each and every one of those areas. So that's it. And yes, I agree.
Yes.
Rosana,
yes, I agree with you guys too.
Rosana, I would love to add one more component to this and
Sure.
I think everyone can relate to this that's on this call, on this webinar, is supply chain attacks, right? The big SolarWinds breach, trusted third-party software vendor, they got breached. That software got dumped into, thousands of organizations' environments. Without having that visibility, how would you even know that you have bad software running in your environment? And that's trusted third party. So it's important, again, having that visibility, continuously monitoring, being able to detect, being able to respond, having the tools, having the expertise in there to be able to rapidly search through the environment, knowing when those indicators of compromise came out through FireEye, and being able to search, being able to and doing it in an automated fashion, not having to manually go from system to system or organization to organization to truly know, these threat actors, although they get in, they still have to take other actions to get to their objective, their ultimate goal. So yeah, you may not have caught them through the SolarWinds software or the backdoor on that SolarWinds system in your environment, but they're not just going to stop there. They're going to want to further infiltrate and get into the rest of your environment. And that's why it's key to, again, changing that mindset from prevention only approach to that continuous monitoring, detection, and response, and getting them out before any damage is done.
Yeah, last I saw, dwell time for an attacker was 90 days on average, right? Like somebody gets into your environment, they're sitting there for 3 months before they take a really bad action against you, and you have 3 months to detect their presence. And right, it's of the utmost importance.
That's a great point, and I do want to actually stick on this. So thinking about that 90-day period right there, if you did have proper visibility, if you were looking in the right places, likely a bunch of flags would have gone off, right? Something would have said, hey, something over here is not normal. So that detection capability is really important, but I want to just take a couple steps back to Dom's example. So Dom had mentioned supply chain attacks. We have seen in the the last couple months, right? There's been quite a bit of things in the news, there's been quite a bit of things in the news. There we go. That's what I'm trying to say. We've seen a lot of news around these types of attacks. We've seen extremely sophisticated threat actors targeting organizations. In some cases, you know, they were looking to get to another organization. We saw Apple, right? They had, I think it was a factory in Taiwan that was targeted, right? The goal was to get the prints, I believe, for the new iPhones that were coming out. And the ransom was quite high, right? So when we think about, you know, the supply chain, when we think about these things, we should also talk about third-party risk, right? Having detection measures, critical. Having prevention, just as important. But the thing that we didn't talk about today, and I'm glad you guys mentioned this, is let's talk about assessing our risk posture, right? Looking at the third parties that we work with. Do any of the three of you want to comment on that?
I certainly do. You know, it goes back to your contracts and making sure you understand your warranties, et cetera, for those particular products and services, and understanding who's actually servicing those products, right? So, you know, it always comes back to IT, right? IT is always to blame whenever any of these happen. But the reality is the supply chain that in some cases is really to blame, and you have to protect yourselves through the warranty language in most contracts. And some of that is not addressed in some of the basic statements that some of these companies put out. I'm sure Dom and Chris can elaborate on that.
Yeah, you know, you're only as secure as your weakest link. So you could have the best security in the world, and you're dealing with third parties. Depending on the type of business you have, if you're dealing with a lot of wire transfers in your industry, you are going to be a major target for a wire transfer fraud, right? So as secure as your environment may be, the trusted third party vendor that you work with, maybe their security is not up to snuff, and now they get into that client's mailbox, and now they're sending emails from that mailbox. And, you know, it's not, you know, it's a phishing email, but it's coming from a legitimate mailbox. It's a legitimate email. It has a legitimate email signature in there. And getting that user to open up and click on something, and we've seen this in situations where they've had the technology in place. They've had some processes, but maybe they didn't train their employees, you know, so if they would have put in some training exercises and simulated phishing exercises against those employees, then it would have never failed. That control would have never failed, and they would have known to look for certain red flags and certain things. What was I expecting this email at this time of the day or at night or in the middle of the night from that user? Maybe they never send stuff at that time. So there's certain red flags to look for. But again, if you just rely on technology alone, you could get duped and you could get exploited by a third party that you constantly have a relationship with and you're dealing with. So you never remove those measures of picking up the phone and calling that person and validating, hey, you just sent me something. What is this all about? And going back to the old way of communicating. You never throw that out the door. So.
Right. Well, it's understanding that third parties, legitimate business contacts, unfortunately, can have a cyber event or cyber attack. So just always staying vigilant is really important. Chris, I'll turn to you just to see if you have any last comments.
Yeah, I think most people that I talk to talking about third-party risk really view this as some injection into their procurement process, and you need to evaluate risk of your vendors that you're bringing on board through your procurement process. But I'm finding a lot of going back to what Dom has said about understanding your environment and putting sensors on all of your assets to understand what's going on. There's just as much danger in like James in finance putting his credit card down for some SaaS application that is like not officially procured, or how many people in tech support have Discord installed on their workstations. There are an infinite number of inject points into your company, assuming you're allowing people to install whatever they want on their computer. And if you don't, it hinders productivity, and you're constantly balancing that. But I think that shadow IT was a really big deal a number of years ago when it came to data like inside threat IP theft. But it's becoming even more of a threat now from a ransomware injection point, data exfiltration, not through a malicious insider, taking a direct action, but your malicious insider now is just trying to chat with their friends through some unofficial chat platform on your work assets. And who knows who's controlling that. And so, right, it's important not only to look at risk from the vendors that you know you're engaging with, but constantly evaluating your environments to understand what vendors have you engaged with that never went through your official procurement channels.
Great point. So obviously we're only scratching the surface here, and there's so much more to talk about when we think about defense in depth and cybersecurity measures and all sorts of things when we talk about the cloud, preventative measures, detection measures. I think there's a lot more to be said. So unfortunately, we only have a limited amount of time today. I do want to open it up to see if anyone has any questions. Not all at once.
If you can't come off mute and you want to throw something in the chat, we are actively monitoring the chat as well. So while we're waiting, Rosana, to see if there's any questions, I just want to comment that I really appreciate, all the insight that the panelists have provided today. And I think that the discussion is definitely thought-provoking, and there are probably 6 or 7 topics that we could take from this discussion alone and go deeper. So I'd like to invite the audience to, if you don't want to do it here, you can let me know offline. If there are topics you want to see from LincolnIT and our partners, we definitely want to hear more of that. And Bernard's asking if we have any vendor recommendations for BAS. BAS.
Sure.
So breach and attack simulation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a number of vendors that are out there. There's Simulate, there's XM Cyber. What are some of the other ones? But the thing is, with those platforms and those tools, you really need to understand, the results, and what's coming about, what comes about with using those tools and understanding, what mitigation techniques, and recommendations that you should take as part of doing those assessments. So, a tool is only good as the people behind it. It's important to work with experts that have the expertise, that understand the latest and greatest attacks, because it's, the tool alone could spit out stuff, but really understanding where your priorities are and what you need to address. Tools are only as good as the folks behind them, and working with an expert to tighten up your infrastructure and follow best practices and guidelines, follow something known as the MITRE attack framework, really understanding the threat actors and ways that they're getting in, and best ways to tighten it up. Not every mitigation that comes out of the result from a service like that may be possible in your environment, especially if you're running some legacy systems or protocols. So again, it's important to work with those experts that understand what is going to work in your industry, what's going to work for your business, because the last thing you want to do is start turning stuff on and off and breaking the overall functionality. So it's important to work with experts with that.
Definitely lean on the Lincoln team. They can certainly facilitate introductions and point you in the right direction. Any other questions? If you're anything like me, your questions normally come like 10 or 15 minutes right after the conversation. So if that does happen, we do welcome you to send them over to us.
Agreed. Thank you, Rosana and the Cybersafe team. Thank you, Chris and the Datto team. Thank you, Ron Cuevas and the LincolnIT team. It's our pleasure to have everybody here. Thank you, everybody who made the time this morning to be here with us. If you are following the series, we're back here on Thursday at 11, where we'll be discussing cloud security with Meraki, another one of our core vendors. So we'd love to see you there if you have the time. These are being recorded, as I mentioned, and they will be on our LincolnIT YouTube channel. And I'd like to also just say that both Datto and Cybersafe are featured on our podium on our LincolnIT website. So if you haven't been there in a while, I'd like to invite you to check it out, and you can understand a little bit more about their solutions and how they integrate with the LincolnIT platform. So on behalf of everybody here, thank you for being here, and we appreciate all of you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye,
Thanks, everyone, for
everyone.
joining.
Thank you.